I played the harp actually because, first of all, my grandfather, who was a layman in the Presbyterian Church, he engaged a harpist to go with him into the prisons in California and lead the prisoners in hymn singing, because you couldn't carry a piano as easily as you could carry a harp. And my mother, as a young girl, saw this instrument being loaded every, I guess, Sunday afternoon, and said, "Oh, I'd like to play one." So this man began to give my mother harp lessons, and later she gave it up to go to college. It seemed in those days it was either play the harp or go to college, not both. But when she married my father, she said if they had a daughter, she wanted her to play the harp. And so when I was 5 years old, they just rented a harp to see if it would take. And I loved it and have been at it ever since.
So your attitude when you were let's say a 10-year-old harpist toward the instrument and toward going to lessons and that sort of thing. So what was your attitude?
I absolutely love the harp. From the very beginning, it seemed like it was something of my own. And even my third grade teacher laughs, because at one point I had evidently taken to wearing white gloves to school. And she said, "Susann, why don't you take off your gloves?" And I said, "Oh, I have to protect my hands. I'm going to be a concert harpist." So at a very early age, you can see I was very serious about it.
And what about the encouragement that you got as a youngster playing the harp?
Teachers have such a major influence on their students' lives. And certainly all of my teachers were so marvelously sensitive to me, I feel, in nurturing the love I had for the harp and encouraging me to the utmost. My first teacher was from my hometown, and she could have probably kept me there the rest of my life. I wouldn't have known the difference. But instead, when I was 12, 13 years old, she said to my parents, "I feel I've taught her everything I can teach her. We must now see that she studies in Chicago." And so began, when I was 13 years old, I began commuting to Chicago and to a fine teacher there who had a tremendous influence on me. And then she in turn had me play for yet another teacher who had been a teacher of hers, a pupil of hers actually. And this person said, "Oh, you must go to the great Henriette Renié in France, and I will see to it. I will make the arrangement." And so at every point, I was so fortunate in having teachers who were willing to pass me on to whomever they felt was the next person to help me. And even Renié was so marvelous, because she too could have kept me. I was perfectly happy. I had no desire to study with anyone else, but she felt that it would be an asset in my career to enter the Paris Conservatory and win a prize there, that it would help me more than just having private lessons with her, to have a title to take home from France. So she then had me play for Lily Laskin, invited Madame Laskin to her home to hear me play, and saw to it that, and then Lily Laskin saw to it that I entered the conservatory. And so even there, I mean, I was just extremely blessed and privileged to have this wonderful group of women who really nurtured me all the way along. I think I felt with each teacher that I was very special to them. No question about that. I did feel each of them, they realized I loved the harp, and they seemed to love what I was doing on the harp, and so it just, it made me feel appreciated, and certainly inspired me to constantly go on. And I feel I learned so very much about teaching from each of my teachers. One perhaps had the quality of just, unreserved love. I mean, just that quality that, this was my first teacher. When she'd come in the door, there was just love, and I think you blossom like a flower under that kind of nurturing. And then my next teacher, enthusiasm, and professionalism. It really, then I began to really realize what was going on out there. This was a big world I had entered, and what was the standard, and what other people were doing, and that what she expected from me, and she started presenting me in recitals in Chicago, and I was perhaps, her star, and but the sights were suddenly set much higher, and I realized it. I realized that I was on my way to being in a career at that point. And then, of course, Mademoiselle Renié, I would say it was the spiritual side of her teaching that made the greatest impact on me. She often, I would come for an hour lesson, and she would talk to me for 3 hours. I was her last major performing student, and I think she had so much to give and share. She was perhaps, and then as an average at that time, about 80 years old. And it was her great spirit and her spiritual life and her deep faith in God that she communicated to me, and which perhaps had the most profound influence on my own faith. And I would say I want to pass that on as well to my students. Certainly one of my favorite pastimes is reading. I'm an avid reader, and I wish I were a little bit more discriminating, because I will read almost anything that is printed. I love to read so much. I think it is such a relaxation for me after a long day of teaching many hours of private lessons, which is such intense work, that I need that contrast to sit back and read. I've also enjoyed doing some writing. I wrote 2 pamphlets to be used both by students and by teachers of the harp. And then, perhaps much more importantly, I wrote a series of Christian meditations that helped me a great deal in sharing my faith. And I'm always very happy to share those with my students. Another thing I've enjoyed doing very much has been composing. I felt when I was a younger teacher that there was not very much material for younger students that showed off the harp. I felt most of the books that were being used by teachers in those days were either simple transcriptions of keyboard literature, therefore much more geared toward the piano than the harp. And I felt this needed to be rectified, and with that in mind, with a colleague, I wrote 5 volumes of graded recital pieces that I think it's fair to say they are played all over the world in every country, and hopefully that they make students love the harp, because they make the harp sound good, and they make the harp sound like a harp, not like a piano. And then, so I think my writing music has been usually always with an aim to help my students. I began to experience also that students were arriving at the university level or conservatory level, and they had had no experience in playing contemporary music, even new music, avant-garde music. There was no music like that for the harp. Everything again was more traditionally written in traditional meters. I'm speaking now for young people. And so again, we decided to write a set of pieces called haiku for the harp, which would give young people from really an early age a chance to play in different time meters. Not everything is written in 3/4 or 4/4 time. To experience different meters, to experience using outside tools, a screwdriver, or inserting paper into the strings to make different sounds, and to get used to using utensils at the harp as well, to employ the device of somewhat theater in harp by getting up and moving around the instrument, by talking or hissing or singing. And we did this all in a context of expressing those beautiful short Japanese poems called haiku, which describe some part of nature and your response to it.
Do you remember some of the names of those?
So some of the titles that we picked were see, a cat asleep on the roof, the sound of rain. frog in the pond and splashing water. Even among insects in this world, some are good at singing, and some are bad. But some of them, in sweeping the garden, something about the snow, and striking the fly. I broke a potted plant or something like that, but they all had some connection with nature.
What about the experience of watching the young harpist play your music?
I love to watch children play it because these pieces were written for children, and I feel children really enjoy the theatrical aspects of these pieces. And again, each of them brings some unique, special part of their own personalities to these pieces. They're meant to do that, and I love to listen to children play these pieces, and they seem to love to play them too. Every harpist does have their special gifts. They're unique gifts because, I mean, they have a different set of fingers, a different kind of skin. They have different intelligence. They have a different physique. And they bring all of this to bear, different sensitivities, different emotions. They bring all of this to bear in their performance. And, I mean, when you hear a harpist competing, say in a competition, where they all have to play the same piece, of course nobody plays them even remotely the same way. And I feel part of my work as a teacher is to pull out of them what do they do that is distinctly, uniquely better than anybody else, and to maximize that in every way I can. So I guess I would say if I have a student whose main gift I feel is a beautiful, warm sound, we're going to choose repertoire that's going to bring that out to the best. And we're going to, try to set that quality off in her playing. And by the same token, if somebody does bis bigliando, or these light, quick, fast passages extremely well and clearly well, I'm going to try to maximize that. I'm going to try to help her bring that out even more. I think attention to detail is part of it. I think I am, if anything, I'm a miniaturist. I love small things. I love small seashells. I collect miniature seashells. I think it's one reason I like the harp, because the harp is a detailed instrument. And but it is attention to detail that puts together and makes a piece, a performance perhaps really brilliant. It is that attention to detail. One of the most unusual experiences I ever had as a performer was when I first came back from Paris in my studies at the conservatory, and I had won the first prize in harp and was the first American to win that honor. And the Chicago Tribune had written about it, and then they invited me to be one of their featured soloists in their huge Chicagoland Music Festival, which was held in Soldiers Field before 60,000 people outdoors. And I just remember they had put a platform in the middle of Soldiers Field, and they brought me out in a convertible and rode me right out to the middle of this platform, and there was one harp sitting there. And I played, but I know that was certainly the largest live audience I ever played before. Nowadays, when I think of being seen by millions on television, I've done quite a bit of television work, and I think really the television camera makes it possible to play for enormous audiences the world over. Another experience I had that was unusual, I think, was that I was living in New York City, and I had a manager who thought, what can I do to make Susann more, to make her better known, to really attract the attention of the press and the wider music-going public. And she said, I know what we'll do. we'll have her do 3 recitals in Carnegie Recital Hall and have her do them all in 1 week, every night a different program for 3 nights, Monday, Wednesday, and the final night will be Friday. So I'm always up for a challenge, and I thought, well, what an exciting, intriguing idea to plan 3 different recitals. And we also had one definite plan, and that was that they would all be original music for harp, no transcriptions. In those days, it was sort of, a bad word to do transcriptions. So I planned these recital programs, and I worked very hard, and really the audiences were very, very enthusiastic, and all the leading harpists of the day came, and Mr. Grangeny was teaching at Juilliard. He brought all of his students, and Carlos Salcedo was teaching at Curtis, and he brought all of his students, and Mildred Dilling had brought. So it was a very prestigious series of recitals. The only one big snag was that all the newspapers in New York City went on strike that week. And so here the whole goal of this thing was for publicity, and there was hardly any publicity. My manager was able to convince a few magazines to come and review the concert, but it was something of a disaster from the standpoint of publicity. I had been concertizing for several years, but always had the dream of being associated with a university or a conservatory. But whenever I talked to anybody about it, they said, well, you yourself don't have a college degree, and all you have is a degree from a prize from a foreign conservatory. So I don't know. And so I kept my ears open and kept hoping that there would be an opportunity for me to teach somewhere. But at the time when I moved to California, primarily to concertize from there, and also most of my family was living there, and I wanted to be closer to my family. But at that time, all the teaching positions were filled. But I was invited to visit friends at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and lo and behold, when I got there, they needed a harp teacher. They didn't have a harp teacher, but they had some harpists, and they had a harp. And so I was immediately offered a teaching position there. So there I was with a job in Arizona, the only job that I could see that was going to be offered me in terms of teaching. But my home was in California. And this was a real turning point in my life, because I did decide I did not want to move to Tucson and leave my family and friends. So I began commuting. And this set a pattern in my life for the next 25, 30 years, because shortly after that, maybe 2 years later, the first California position was offered to me, and that was the teacher at California State University, California State College at Los Angeles, I think it was called in those. And so I started a harp department there. They had never had one, and I began a harp department there. And then the year after that happened, the University of Southern California, which was the major school of music in California, opened up. And I was engaged to be the teacher, to chair their harp department. So all during that time, then I was teaching at 3 colleges and commuting still to the University of Arizona. And then after that, Marcel Grangeny died, and this was in 1975. And I was engaged then by the Juilliard School in New York to replace him, to succeed him, and to chair the harp department at the Juilliard School. And that was a major, major decision, because then it would have meant giving up all my work on the West Coast, where I still really wanted to live. But I accepted the position, and so I began commuting from Los Angeles to New York, and I did it for 5 years, eventually having an apartment in New York and spending more and more time in New York. And then finally what happened was that the Indiana University Harp Department opened up, and I thought to myself, well, this would truly put me closer to New York, and this now really is what I should do, is I should move to Indiana. And then I did resign all of those Western universities. And for 5 years, I continued then commuting from Bloomington to New York City. But the strange thing was that it was almost harder to do that because I began to go more and more frequently until I reached the point where I decided that I was going to stop commuting. I was going to settle down in one place, and I decided it would be Bloomington, not New York. And so I resigned my position at Juilliard and decided to make Bloomington really my home. In those years also, I felt that I was in something of a box. I had no time to accept master classes in different countries around the world. My schedule was terrible. And I was concertizing usually two tours coast to coast, one left from the West Coast, one left from the East Coast. So my schedule was really almost impossible. When I look back on it, I don't see how I did it. But I think that those experiences have given me an insight into what it is like for young people today to find work. And I urge them not to go to the big cities where there are already too many harpists, but to go where they are needed and to make an ever-expanding circle for themselves. And I feel like if people will not always feel they must have the top symphony orchestra job, but to go for one of the smaller, medium-sized orchestras and get their experience, then when they take that all-important audition for a major orchestra, they increase their chances enormously that they'll win it. When I was in junior high school and high school, I used to tag along with my father and my brother and loved to play golf with them. And it's a hobby that I've kept up all these years. I think particularly it's enjoyable because the work at the harp is rather detailed and certainly involves an awful lot of sitting. And there's something about getting out there on a beautiful golf course with green grass and beautiful trees and swinging, taking a full swing and using your larger arm muscles and back muscles that is very, very relaxing to me. I just love to do it. Victor Salvi, the owner of Lina Healy, is really an avid golfer too. He loves it. And last time he was here, he and his wife played golf with me in Bloomington. But I don't know. I have to say I don't know any other harpists who play golf. I was trying to think if I do. But you know what did happen? One time I played with Jerry Carlos, who is our professor of percussion, former percussionist with the Philadelphia Orchestra. And Jerry is an avid golfer. He just loves it. He makes his own clubs. I mean, he's really... And so we played together, and he said we ought to have a tournament just for, what did he call it? Really, where people would come to watch us play, because he's very good, and sometimes I can be pretty good. But not too many harpists play golf. I have to say it's rather hard on the hands playing golf, the grip and whatnot. I never can practice after I play. My hands are too tired usually. So I have a daily schedule that every morning I try to do these things, not always in this order, but I usually I read my Bible and spend some time in prayer. I try to almost always take a walk, at least half an hour to 45 minutes. And then I go to the harp and I practice. Sometimes I have the luxury of practicing whatever I want to, but many, many times I only have time to practice my students' music and to go over some repertoire that I need to look at for them. Then by 12:30 I'm always at school and I teach all afternoon. And often in the evening there are recitals or concerts that I need to go to. So my schedule in Bloomington is pretty preordained. And then on top of that, weekends, usually I have a number of foreign students that fly here for anywhere from 1 week to 6 weeks to 3 months to work with me, in addition to my load at the university. And particularly this springtime, there will be a lot of foreign students arriving already this weekend. And then in May, as soon as school is out, I've been invited to go back to my alma mater and teach at the Paris Conservatory, to teach a master class there and also at the Conservatory of Lyon, France. And so I'll be there for the middle of May, toward the end of May, teaching classes there. And then I'll have a short vacation in Switzerland, where I have a little Swiss chalet where I do spend most of my summers. And then I'll come back to Bloomington for the International Harp competition, and also a large master class that will be here in Bloomington just prior to that. And then after that, I'll go back to Switzerland for another master class, which is usually attended by the European harpists. So that about brings me back up to August, when IU starts again. When the phone rings, if it's not the World Harp Congress calling me, it's the International Harp Competition calling me, or it's a student calling me, or, I mean, it's just always sort of unrelenting that way. But if I did have one thing I would like, and that would be more time to spend with friends and family, and just to have things a little bit more time to play golf. And more time to practice for myself. I enjoy practicing a lot, and I never seem to quite have enough time to do that.